Vantor, delivering sovereign spatial intelligence that gives nations the ground truth.
Hello and welcome back. There's quite a bit going on in the world at the moment, but I'm going to focus largely on AUKUS and nuclear-powered submarines, and this has been prompted by several things, including news from Singapore last week that I discussed previously, with Australia now getting 3 used Virginia-class SSNs rather than 2 used and 1 new, which was the original formula, and I'll explain in a moment why the narrative of the government and the Royal Australian Navy that this is wonderful news for Australia is just plain wrong. Something that most commentators and my colleagues in the media don't understand. Now, that burst of news from Singapore has been reinforced by information coming out of Senate estimates hearings into the Defence, Foreign Affairs and Trade portfolios, and I'll go into those details because not everyone has the patience to sit through about a day and a half of hearings. Oh, and in future, as a consequence of those hearings, I'll go into the disgraceful performance of Defence and the Royal Australian Navy on the Collins Life of Type Extension Program. I just don't have enough time to do it justice in this episode, but I certainly will in the future. Now, a quick glimpse internationally. The Strait of Hormuz remains shut, and I wish the media would stop reporting every comment from Donald Trump that negotiations are just about to conclude as somehow being factual, when surely everyone can see by now that it's not about to end. And journalists need to realize that for the moment, the competing demands of the US, Israel, and Iran are completely irreconcilable. And until all 3 countries start to move, start to give a bit of ground, nothing is going to happen. And can I just say at this juncture that the Prime Minister and others claiming that closing the strait is justification for buying nuclear-powered submarines, this is complete and utter nonsense. Submarines are largely useless in the current conflict, although, as I've previously said, I suspect the few surviving Iranian conventional mini-submarines are exercising a powerful deterrent effect. And you cannot use submarines to clear minefields. You cannot use submarines to shoot down drones and cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. So let's instead talk about what you can use submarines for. And fundamentally, they are a very large, powerful stick to deter aggression. One of the most powerful weapons in any country's infantry. And the logic goes for a potential aggressor: you attack us, and we will start attacking you. We will use our submarines to attack your seaborne targets, be that warships or LNG carriers or whatever, and also increasingly for land strike. We will come close to the surface somewhere near your coast, and all of a sudden you will be facing a barrage of cruise missiles when you didn't expect it. So that's the concept of deterrence, to be powerful enough to make an opponent think not just twice, but basically decide not to attack you because it's not going to be worthwhile. Now, the concept of deterrence seems to work for most normal people, but this is where I bring in the US Defense Secretary, the comically renamed Secretary for War, Peter Hegseth, who, by the look of it, enjoys killing people. You know, somebody who actually rejoices, takes pleasure in destruction and death, as I suspect does his President Donald Trump. Now, very recently, he gave a speech at the 82nd anniversary of the D-Day landings to compare, and you wonder where I'm going with this, but just bear with me. Anyway, the Secretary of War used that speech to compare migrants crossing the Mediterranean to the defeat of the Nazis by the D-Day invasion, and the backlash was immediate and relatively bipartisan. Let's be clear about this. In the mind of the US Secretary of War, The people defending the beaches from invasion were the good guys. Think about that for 1 second. The guys defending the beaches were the Nazis, you fool. It was the Nazis who killed lots of Americans and who also conducted the Holocaust against Europe's Jews and any number of other millions of dead people. Now, according to our defence minister, he is proud to call Pete Hegseth his good friend, and I'd say at the very least, our defence minister is not much of a judge of character. Just while I'm on this theme, President Donald Trump marked the same anniversary by flooding social media with AI-generated images and videos celebrating himself. The old president spent the weekend posting a stream of bizarre content to Truth Social, his own channel, including an AI-generated music video depicting himself riding a lion, skydiving with a red parachute, mingling with adoring crowds, and sharing meals with world leaders. That's our great and powerful friend. So let's talk about deterrence and making the ADF as strong and robust as sensible. I mean, we have to work within a budget. We're not North Korea. We can't spend like 40% on defense. So let's talk about what we can do within sensible parameters. And this is where I want to focus on this story put out by the government and accepted by so many people without question. It's tame boosters that 3 old Virginia-class submarines are better than 2 old and 1 new. And I think we can demolish that one fairly quickly. A Block 7 Virginia-class submarine that was to be the new one that Australia was to get under the previous formula. It's not yet built. It's been substantially designed. It is a much bigger submarine than a Block 4. It's 140 meters in length versus 115 because it has far greater firepower. It's more than 2,000 tons heavier. Now, a Block 4 carries 12 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles. A Block 7 has 40. In other words, a single Block 7 has as much land strike firepower as 3.5 Block 4 Virginias. Now, Block 7, furthermore, is also optimized for the protection of undersea cables, and it also will be able to deploy a variety of autonomous underwater vehicles. And in fact, in his Shangri-La Dialogue speech in Singapore, Defence Minister Richard Marles highlighted this very important need to protect undersea cables. So that all of that capability is going to be in the future Block 7, and only some of it is in Block 4. Now, if I were the Defence Minister and the RAN came to me and said, we want 3 Block 4 Virginias rather than 2 Block 4s and a new, far more capable Block 7s, because the Block 4s are cheaper to maintain, frankly, I would ask for their resignations. Now, the Block 4 submarines, this argument that they're cheaper to maintain, that is true, though I question exactly how much is involved. All complex platforms, even within the same class, have differences between them. It might be as small as the microwave oven that goes in the mess, or it might be, a pump from a different supplier. In a general sense, yes, things within a certain class are easier to maintain, but let's not overstate that. And the other thing that I come back to is that Block 4 and Block 7 have pretty much the same combat system and the same propulsion system, so I'm not sure how different the support and training requirements will actually be. Now, the Royal Australian Navy, and Richard Marles again is parroting all of this, saying that simplicity is the key. We have to keep this as simple as possible. At the same time, the RAN is prepared to introduce a new combat system and new sensors for the surface fleet via the Megami frigates to be purchased from Japan. They cannot have it both ways. Either, if simplicity is your goal, you try and standardize around a combat system and sensors, or if simplicity is not your key driver, then submarines of different classes shouldn't make any difference. So I think it's very clear that the United States, taking into account the much, much more powerful deterrent effect of Block 7 Virginia-class submarines, rather than Block 4, has just decided to keep all of the Block 7s for themselves. But of course, the government and the Navy cannot admit that, because to do so would undercut all of their rhetoric that this AUKUS deal is some sort of equal cooperative relationship with the US, when it is not. We will be told, in fact, we are being told what we will get, when we will get them, irrespective of which is operationally the better submarine. I'll just repeat, Block 7 Virginias are a much more powerful deterrent than Block 4, 40 Tomahawk cruise missiles versus 12, and all of the other features, protection of cables, deployment of uncrewed systems. For Australia to have a new Block 7 in the inventory would be giving us a very, very big stick to swing. And this idea, if officials are serious, that they would prefer older technology with far less deterrent capability because it's cheaper to maintain, even though they can't say how much cheaper it is, they should be sacked. Now, another little curiosity that I'm going to have to research, and in a way that sort of sounds more positive if you're a believer in Australia ever receiving SSNs from the US, which I'm not. But the previous talk of Australia receiving submarines about 15 years old, that was always my assumption. That was now the rhetoric coming from the United States as well as Australia. But now, local AUKUS boosters are saying that submarines will only be 6 years old. Now, that's interesting. I wonder what's going on there. I don't know if that has any substance, or whether, again, people are just dressing this up, trying to put lots of lipstick on a pig to make it appear more attractive. Keep that one in mind. Now, another contribution to all of this was last Sunday when the Greens defence spokesman David Shoebridge appeared on Insiders on the ABC, and Senator Shoebridge had to correct David Spears, the anchor, who seemed to believe that submarines from the US are guaranteed. Of course, they are not. And it also doesn't matter what you think of Greens politics. The fact is that Senator Shoebridge is the most effective questioner in Senate estimates, although I will say the Liberals' Senator James Paterson is starting to catch up, and Senator Shoebridge has exposed many of the failings of AUKUS, such as the no refund clause for the $10 billion we are giving to the US and UK industrial bases. Now, David Spears, I thought, was at his worst, incredulous that submarines could be supplied in less than 10 years, reflecting the government's talking points. We have no choice. Well, of course they can. I speak with the Koreans and the Japanese. I'm in almost constant contact with them. There are certainly ways that you can do this. And just to dismiss the idea out of hand is flying against all of the known facts. Now, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, was asked later in the day, in the light of Senator Shoebridge's comments that he didn't think that nuclear-powered submarines were appropriate for Australia's needs. And of course, the Prime Minister gave his usual reply. No, it's all fine. Nothing to worry about. And when asked about this critical issue of the US not being able to lift the production rate of submarines, I keep on emphasizing, for me, the most important issue, our Prime Minister said, well, he wasn't worried at all. And it was left at that. But why not, PM? Why aren't you worried? Why are you so confident that the US can lift production to at least 2 Virginia-class submarines per year when all of the objective evidence shows that that is going to be a struggle? Who has told you this is going to happen? What evidence do you have? Have you received briefings from the US, or is this information all being funneled through the Australian Submarine Agency? Now, what's desperately needed is an independent inquiry, and as people know, here at APDR, we try and help the government. So let's make this easy by leaving AUKUS out of the equation. Yes, let's let the Australian Submarine Agency just do their thing, whatever those 1,000 people are doing. Oh, and by the way, another thing from Senate estimates that left me stunned, according to the ASA, they don't yet know how much a second-hand Virginia-class submarine is going to cost Australia. They're 4 years into this, and they do not know what it's going to cost. I mean, surely that would have been one of the first things on your list to sort out. What if the Americans turn around and say it's going to be, $10 billion a submarine? Anyway, sounds like the ASA has not been doing its job. What's desperately needed is an independent inquiry. And this should be a group of 5 to 10 intelligent people, preferably led by a retired apolitical judge. They need to be supported by 2 very experienced people from the major private sector project delivery side of things, big infrastructure projects or complex high-tech undertakings. You need someone else with a strong S&T background, perhaps a neutral ex-senior public servant, and someone new, not Dennis Richardson on his 50th inquiry. No disrespect to Dennis, who I know well. It's just a fresh perspective would be good. And perhaps a retired neutral RAN figure. And I can think of a couple who have not yet been consumed by or have not yet consumed the AUKUS Kool-Aid. They need to spend 6 months determining if Australia could receive a new class of submarines, probably diesel-electric with advanced air-independent propulsion. But a nuclear-powered submarine either from South Korea or France should also be studied. Now, I've spoken before about South Korean technology, less about Japan, but I note, and I've said this before, that Germany and Norway developing the new Type 212 CD, I've referenced it before, ultra-quiet, now with hull shaping to reduce detection from active sonar. Its endurance, always a touchy characteristic, is 40 days. 40 days just on its fuel cell system. And then you get another few days on top of that using the battery pack. And that is at a respectable 8 knots underwater, undetectable. Many people are attracted, including ministers, to what I call the empty appeal of nuclear-powered submarines, being able to travel for unlimited time for 30 knots underwater. Yes, that is a hugely impressive characteristic. Yeah, but how often is that practically useful? How often is that going to assist in the defence of Australia? And you also have to think about how many additional tens of billions of dollars are we paying for this single performance feature? Or to put it another way, for every one Virginia-class SSN, new or used, you could have between 3 and 5 conventional submarines able to remain underwater completely undetected for increasingly long periods of time. As I've said before, battery technology is the way of the future. So much investment is occurring in that domain because of EVs and the whole decarbonization of the world's economy. There's going to be development after development. That's the way of the future. That combined with extra large, uncrewed underwater systems powered by AI. Now, I had hoped to get to a few other things. I'm out of time. I'll try and do a bit of tidying up in the next podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye for now, and see you next time.
Vantor delivers sovereign spatial intelligence so nations can own the ground truth. See how at vantor.com.